So this is design feedback for everyone. And what we're going to talk about is how to give constructive feedback, especially on design and aesthetics, to people who are not designers. So like I said, that's what we're going to talk about. If you want to leave now, hard feelings or anything, but yeah, we just got to keep those aisles clear. So just kind of a quick show of hands to get started and to kind of get the blood flowing. Everybody's got that food coma right now. Who in here considers themselves professionally to be a designer of some kind? Okay. What about a developer, again, of any kind of stripe or kind? Okay. And then who's kind of other? Maybe sales team, project managers, management, leadership, scrum master, et cetera. Okay, great. So we've got a good mix. That's kind of about what I predicted. Developer heavy, which is to be expected at Star Trek, but that's great. My name is Eric Browning. This is my second time speaking at Star Trek. They made these awesome avatars this year, so I thought I just had to put it in there somewhere. I had a great time here last year, so I was really excited when they accepted my proposal to speak again. And I don't know about you guys, but so far my morning sessions were really good. I was really impressed. So I hope to kind of continue that, and I hope that everybody here leaves with something useful today. Just a brief note, in my personal life, the past couple months have been kind of insane, to be honest. This is the house my wife and I lived in for about 8 years. We decided to move, and our house sold in about 2 days. And we've frantically looked to find another house. We haven't been able to find one yet, so then we went through the process of finding a rental, which we're moving into now, and we both have full-time jobs. And we've got this guy, who's about 10 months old, and we'll throw a dog in the mix there, too. These two, they like to play a game called See Who Can Get Up Earlier in the Morning. And Theo's currently winning at about 4:30 every day. And the only reason I bring this up is if I seem a little scatterbrained or a little over-caffeinated, I apologize. Those are both definitely true most days. And I promise no more baby pictures. So the scenario. Let's talk about the problem that's at the heart of why we're here today. I think it's something we've all been faced with, regardless of our background or experience levels, right? A coworker comes to you, in the hallway, and says to you one of these phrases, right? What do you think of this? How does this look? Can I get some feedback? Right? Just saying these phrases or just thinking about it sometimes make people kind of anxious, right? I think we get faced with these, and this is what we look like in response a lot of the time. Side note here, it's very difficult to find a picture of a deer in headlights that has a freely available license. So we'll just kind of use our imagination. I know he looks pretty happy in his foliage, but he's really frozen in fear. So that's what we'll picture. So as I was thinking about this, I wanted to think about why this happens. Because again, it happens to essentially everybody, regardless of your background or skill level. I think this anxiety and this kind of discomfort, it can be traced somewhat to background, right? A lot of you in this room, especially the developers, project managers and things, I'm guessing you didn't go to art school. You didn't learn formal critiquing or anything like that. You probably didn't have an internship or a co-op at a design studio or something similar where you were around other people to see how that was done or to hear the vocabulary used. But I think beyond just background, a lot of it boils down or can be traced pretty easily to our everyday routines, our workflows. So what I mean by that is, again, most of you in this room, your days don't look like this, right? I'm guessing you don't spend your days working with fonts, evaluating color palettes, sketching and prototyping. Maybe developers are doing that more and more, but just in broad strokes. What I'm guessing is a lot of your days probably look more like this, right? Writing code. Maybe doing code reviews or planning out application architecture, something like that. Or even planning out time and resource management. I've worked with developers my whole life, so I know also that in reality, most of your days are spent doing this, but we won't get into that too much. Excuse me. So what is feedback? What is a design critique? Well, tackling the latter up there first, a design critique is sort of a formal sort of structured meeting to review a design and try to evaluate it. Google Ventures is a design studio that put out a great post a little while back on how to do a design critique. There's a lot of rules. There's a formal process to who can speak when and what can be said or what can be referred to. And I think for our purposes, that's not really necessary. That's much more of a designer thing to do, or especially if you're in design school or something like that. So going back to the first part there, I think we're referring to feedback as a much more informal thing. Likely it's just you and this other person, maybe a small team, but somebody's just asking your thoughts and you're just trying to share them. So what is feedback, right? Well, I looked around a little bit and I found this definition, which at first I liked a lot. A thoughtful consideration of design. It's very almost elegant, right? It's very crisp. It can be applied in a broad way to almost anything you could think of with design. And that comes from a guy by the name of Khoi Vinh. He works at Adobe now. Before that, he was the lead designer at New York Times when they really revamped their web presence. And so he's done a lot of kind of high-profile things. Excuse me. But the more I looked at it, I realized it was a little too vague. It was a little too broad, for what we're trying to get at today. So that led me to this. We'll kind of walk through this one. Evaluating design and aesthetic choices, I think that part is pretty obvious. That's what we're looking at here. We're not looking at code necessarily. A code review is kind of an entirely different process. But the last part there, to try and improve the outcome, I think that's a key point. I don't want to be glossed over. The goal here, we're not sharing our opinions for opinion's sake or to make the person feel good, or unlike design school or something, we're not trying to tear somebody down so that they can be built up stronger. And we're not trying to appeal to office politics. The goal should honestly be to make the end product or service better. And this quote comes from someone who's a little less famous, which is me. So how is feedback useful, right? What is the point of giving feedback? So I've been a designer for about 10 years professionally in different formats. And I can tell you that good feedback is truly invaluable. And in the right context, it can make or break a project. And I know that sounds melodramatic, but it's really true. So good feedback, it helps me in a number of ways. Good, right? It helps me to gut check my assumptions and my approach. When we're approaching a design of any kind, even if you have excellent references and research, maybe you've got personas you're working with and clear goals, design is making a series of small decisions and putting them together, right? And with that, you're making a lot of assumptions. I might be making assumptions about how something will be used, or someone's frame of mind when they're using it, or the device they're using it on, right? And it's natural to make these, but I think it's also easy to make the wrong assumptions. So having feedback early on in the process and having someone kind of just give a quick check to make sure I'm not mistaken at a base level with any of my assumptions is really valuable. And it's also useful sometimes to get a fresh set of eyes. There's a good chance I might have been heads down on this for 2 or 3 days, and I've just kind of got that tunnel vision, and someone else coming in, looking at it for the first time, might see something from a totally different perspective, which can be really useful. Another good thing it will do is uncover unforeseen biases, and this is a term I had a professor use, sacred cows in design. And I know bias in general has been sort of a hot topic of culture, especially the tech industry lately. And I know that I personally bring a lot of bias to every project I start on. And I'm not even referring to the things that are obvious or that we're probably thinking about, that I'm male, I'm Caucasian, I grew up middle class, I went to college. Those are certainly relevant, but I'm talking about things that are even sort of more beyond that, or even sort of less considered than that. I have at least decent vision. I have control of my mental facilities. I have manual dexterity that I can tap or click something. So these are all things that, unless I make a conscious decision to approach otherwise, I'm bringing into a project. And by asking somebody else, by getting somebody else's feedback, I'm getting their point of view. And they very well might not have the same bias that I do, or they might not bring the same set of restrictions or lack of restrictions that I do. And the second part there, the sacred cows, this is just referring to, I'm sure you've seen the pictures, in India, they have a cow in the middle of a huge traffic jam, and the traffic is just flowing around it, because it's revered, it's treated with respect, and no one wants to move it or interfere in any way. So they bend everything that they do around this. And that's something that can happen in design. Let's say I started out this project, I was putting things together, I put this blue sidebar in, and I love that blue sidebar. It popped, it matched, maybe some app that I saw or something. Then we end up changing the colors, we move things around, but I keep that sidebar in there. And I sort of bend everything else to adjust to that, or I force that to stay in there. Well, I might have been doing that for several days, and then I come and I ask somebody for feedback, hey, what do you think of this? And they tell me, you know, it looks great, it's easy to read, I think it's doing what we need it to do, but that blue sidebar is way too prominent, and it just doesn't make any sense. So that makes me step back a little bit and say, man, you know, have I been focusing on this too much? Is this a sacred cow? Do I need to say, this is not actually that important for the good of the design? The other good thing it will do, eliminate surprises late in the process and make your team feel more involved, make your team feel more collaborative. If I'm not getting feedback, everything is kind of a surprise. There's a good chance you might not even see designs until they launch or until they get over to whoever's in charge of building them, if it's not me or whatever it is. But by having rounds of feedback, working iteratively, and getting people on the team involved, people feel like they have more of a hand in the process, right? So there's not going to be surprises at the last minute. And rather than just looking at something and going, oh man, the designers did a great job, or the design team really knocked that out, they feel like we as a team did something good. So that's a really valuable point to having good feedback as well. So obviously we looked at good. What is bad feedback? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What are some things to try to avoid? This is a big one. I don't care. I'm just the developer. And I think in general, apathy is one of the hardest things to combat, especially in our industry. But it's really important that you try to do that. And people think because they're not designers, they don't have that background, they don't have anything important to add, which I don't think is true. Or the other side of it is that they might honestly not care that much about aesthetics. I know a lot of you in this room probably don't care as much about aesthetics as I do. That's probably why you're not in the design field. That's why you went into a different field. And that's okay. But I bet that there's something about the project that you care a lot about, or something that you feel strongly about. You might think about how it's going to tie in with your code environment, right? Or maybe if you're on sort of more of the marketing side, you might think about who the customers are you're trying to reach. So I think falling back on your own experience and your own background is a way to kind of combat this. And there's not a separate slide for it, but an equally damning statement to this is no statement at all. Silence is crushing. I know it feels awful when you put something out there. You're putting yourself out there, you're putting your work out there, you're asking for feedback, you're asking someone to comment. And if nobody says anything, you just feel awful. So I would suggest that, obviously we're going to go through some ideas today on how to come up with good feedback, but even if you can't come up with anything, please just respond to the person. Let them know, hey, I'm taking a look at this, I don't have any thoughts yet, but I'll get back to you. Just reaching back out is important. This is another big one. It looks off, but I can't put my finger on it. And I think that's really common. I know even to an experienced designer, this one's common, right? And it's an easy one to fall back on. And it's not inherently bad as long as you can follow it up with something more specific. So I would suggest, if you have to start with this, use a reference to make a comparison, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. Or ask for the designer's justification on something, which we'll also talk about in a minute. The real issue with this is that, yes, it lets the designer know there's an issue or a problem with the design, but it's so vague that not only do they have to try to solve the design problem, but they have to sort of solve the personnel problem with you, the interpersonal problem, to kind of guess or fish out what that actually is before they can go solve it. So it's basically just a really inefficient way to approach things. This is another one. It's kind of hard to see up there. Being overly prescriptive in your feedback. Telling them, let's make the header purple 10 pixels wider. Let's change the colors of the rollover to this. Doing the designer's work for them, essentially, right? This is obviously a problem because most of you probably aren't a better designer than your designers. And you might be. Congratulations, I guess if so. You might have some hiring issues or some workflow issues. But there are valid cases where you might be. Maybe you're a senior person and you don't have the time to work on something. I think you should still try to avoid this because if you look at it in terms of the designer brought something to you and clearly it wasn't where it needed to be or there were issues. If you simply tell them exactly what to do, you're increasing the likelihood that in the future they're just going to make the same mistakes again. They don't really understand why something is wrong or why it has to be fixed. So they're just going to come back with the same thing or something similar, or you just put it entirely on them to sort of learn on their own. So if you can turn this around and give valuable feedback, you're solving that problem. Another one, let's take a vote. It sounds great on the surface, right? Especially if you're on a team with a lot of stakeholders or a lot of decision makers or people with important titles. But this is something we call design by committee, I'm sure people have heard of, and I don't think it really ever works very well. The reason it doesn't work well is that a designer, at least a good designer, in my opinion, their job is to take these disparate requirements and disparate content and pieces and goals. They take these thoughts and external inputs, and they bring that all together, right? And they work with it, and they sort of serve as a filter. And then the output is kind of a unified, cohesive vision, to the work, to the problem. By taking a vote, and a lot of times taking a vote is combined with the previous slide, right? You go around the room. Okay, Sheila wants it made 10 pixels bigger. Dave wants it moved down a little bit. But by taking a vote and by combining these things, you're just stripping out that value of the designer. And there's a good chance that the end result isn't going to be very cohesive. It's not going to feel like it makes sense. It's not going to feel like it was built as one. It's going to feel like a bunch of pieces shoved together, because that's ultimately what it is. So, how to give good feedback? Finally, get to it. Here are some simple ways I think you can give good feedback. It's important to note, if you look up how to give design feedback online, which naturally I did and a lot of people do, there's 1,000,001 tutorials that essentially sort of teach you to be a half-assed designer. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it at all. I think everybody in this room can offer valuable feedback to someone on design or on aesthetics, without being a designer. Certainly, if you're interested, you could learn more about it, and that can help you engage a more fruitful dialogue, but I don't think it's that important. So I'm not here to teach you guys to be a designer, so we're not going to talk about any of those things that are important to designers, because I don't think you need to use them to evaluate design. So we're not going to talk about contrast, hierarchy, color, typography, all the things that designers are into every day, Moleskine journals. Instead, we're going to go with these 4. They're listed out as steps. It's not really meant to be followed in order. But essentially, these 4 tools that I think you can use. There's these 4 ideas to try and provide useful feedback, right? So establish common goals. Ask why. Look for pain points in the design. And think bigger picture. And like I alluded to a little bit, these do not have to be followed in order, and you don't have to do all 4. And if you have some really great feedback, you don't have to do any of these. These are tools you can leverage when you don't know what to say or you don't know how to approach a problem. So I came up with these as kind of just a simple to remember system. I'm not going to make you sit through some lame acronym. It's just kind of a simple framework to help understand and to try to remember. So the first one there, establish common goals. This is just to make sure that you and the designer are on the same page about what the goals are for the project. It's easy, and I've been part of this too, to have your communications or your dialogue go spectacularly off the rails when you are not headed in the same direction, right? If your goal is to launch something quickly and you just need a set of eyes on this, and the person giving you feedback is evaluating it as it's an entire relaunch of the application, you're not going to be approaching things in the proper way. You're going to be talking about problems that aren't there, or trying to solve things that just aren't even necessary. So, who is the design for? Is it something new? Is it a large rebuild, or just a quick patch or a quick fix? Those are really important. When you're establishing common goals, if there's any assets that your company has, specifically things like personas, customer segmentation, any of the sort of UX deliverables, anything like that can be a great asset to use. What you can do is you can use, like in this instance, we have these rough personas, use the personas to guide what you're doing. So if I come to you and I ask for some feedback, you come back, you say, sure, let's take a look at what you're doing. And we work together a little bit, and we say, okay, we are going to add 2-factor authentication to our app so that Ahmed, it's our middle guy up there, so that Ahmed will feel more comfortable logging in on his phone. That's a well-defined goal, right? That's easily understood by both sides. It's clear, it's not ambiguous, and it's easy to discuss and debate around that specific point. I also think it's important, as part of this step, establish common goals, to consider goals of the feedback itself. Like I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes that I may be really early on, or the designer may be really early on. So it's just a concept. So they're looking at really high-level things, and they want really a broad evaluation of the whole approach. And then there's times that, I need to push something to QA before everybody goes home at 5, and I just want someone to let me know there's no spelling mistakes, right? Those are wildly different scopes for feedback. And if I'm expecting A and you're thinking B, again, we could have a mismatch there. So to establish common goals, you can use phrases like, who's the target for this, right? Just ask. Ask what are your next steps, maybe for the designer specifically, to find out how far along they are in the process, or the next steps for the project. The next thing you can do, the next piece of our puzzle there, is to ask why. And I think asking why and posing that question to designers and designs is hugely important, and it's one of the most overlooked things, I think, in our industry, in my opinion. If you don't like something, instead of just trying to force out a suggestion or making a direct criticism or something, ask why they did what they did. In my opinion, any good designer should be able to tell you why they made a certain choice, right? Why they made a certain assumption, why they made something look the way it did. Obviously, there's a little caveat there. They might not be able to do it on the spot. They might have to gather their thoughts and get back to you a little bit. And sometimes we make decisions purely based on aesthetics. That's just kind of being honest. But in general, someone should usually be able to provide justification and sort of a reasoned defense behind why they did what they did. I would go so far as to say, if not, they're probably a bad designer. I know that makes some people mad. Eric at coffeeandcode.com. We can yell at each other over the internet like civilized people. The thing that asking why will do, and one important part of this, is that you can use it as a powerful tool. Specifically, if you yourself, maybe you look at something and you have some kind of vague criticisms, but again, you don't have that background, so you don't know how to specifically critique. Or maybe it's just undefined in general. What asking why will do is kind of parlay those criticisms into useful talking points. So if I don't like a menu, maybe I'm a very direct person and I could just tell you, I don't like that menu. Well, that doesn't really help me out, right? I don't really know how to change it. I don't really know what's wrong other than that you don't like it. If you rephrase that a little bit to say, why did you move the menu over there? Or can you walk me through your process on setting up the menu the way you did? There's a good chance you can turn it into a useful talking point and open up a discussion that way. The other great thing about asking why is that it falls back on aspect of human nature a little bit. If you're asking why, sometimes you don't even have to follow up at all, and your comments will have been hugely beneficial in the process. And so let me give you a little example. I know we've all experienced this. I just don't know the official term for it. Let's say you're working on some code. You're trying to solve a problem. You're stuck. You really just can't figure it out. So you have somebody come over. You ask them to look at it. On your screen, you walk them through what you did. You explain what you're trying to do and where it's not working. And in that process, you solve the problem yourself, right? I think we've all been there. Everybody's had it happen to them. You laugh it off. The other person goes off, patting themselves on the back, even though they did basically nothing. But if you're asking why, you're forcing a designer to step outside their comfort zone a little bit and look at a design in a bit different way than they might be used to, or at least a different frame of mind. So there's a good chance that, much like our example, they're going to come up with some ideas themselves. When they're looking at it critically and defending it to you or thinking themselves into their own reasoning, they might see some weaknesses in the design, or they might see some areas that they could improve on. A good example here. Oh, excuse me. So some phrases you can use for this. What made you choose X, right? Or if you're looking at something and something's really not working well for you, I'm struggling with Y. Can you walk me through your process? The third part in there, look for pain points. And this is specifically referring to pain points in a design. I think this is useful when you look at a design and you just don't have any immediate thoughts to share, right? Nothing really comes to mind, or something's off and you can't put your finger on it. What I'm suggesting you do here is you look at a design, and in your head you break it down into kind of that atomic level. You break it down into little pieces, and you just go through and evaluate each little piece. What you're trying to do is you're trying to find your own personal pain points in that design. You know, when I'm looking at it, looking at each little piece, what feels off? What's hard to read? What doesn't seem to match? What seems too big? On the surface, it seems kind of petty or kind of unimportant, or it's not going to get anywhere. But as you'll see in a minute, you know, it can lead to something really valuable. So the way you can kind of do this, you know, you don't have to actually physically do it, but mentally, just walk yourself through a design. Tackle a piece. Maybe you look at the header. Okay, overall the header. Does it look like a header I would expect for this product or service? Does it seem like it would work the way I would expect? Can I read everything? Is it matching our technology or our font stack like we mentioned? Gather some notes. If you see anything that's wrong, obviously keep that, jot that down somewhere, or you could be doing this along with your designer as well. The next step, though, obviously continue down with the application or the page. So you're going to go through each piece, and you're just trying to find, you know, little quibbles, little issues you might have, or the things that just don't feel right, things that just make you feel odd inside when you look at them. Anything like that, you know, you want to note, and you want to try to do it at a very basic level if possible. Because once you've identified these pain points, a lot of times what you'll find is that as you go through the pain points, the problem really isn't, oh, this font needs to be this way, and this type needs to do this, and this type needs to do this. But what happens is you realize some underlying recurring themes or patterns, right? If we have a bunch of specific comments about type not feeling right, and fonts being too small, and this not fitting, and we don't know if that's going to work with a long headline, what that actually might mean is that the whole hierarchy of the design in terms of maybe images versus text is off. Maybe there's way too many images and not enough text for what you actually need. Now, being able to critique that is a little bit more of kind of an advanced level thing. So I don't expect you to be able to do that right off the base. But you're probably able to look at things and notice if something's wrong. So this is a way you can make little small criticisms and hopefully work together with the designer to find some patterns and themes that maybe hint at larger issues or larger things that need addressed. So you might use some phrases like this, and this one's a little more vague. But you know, you might tell them, I'm diving deep into the menu. Something isn't working with the menu, and something with the navigation specifically feels off. You know, so maybe you make a note of that. Maybe you make a note of other navigation pieces or menus that feel off as well. Or, you know, let's talk about text sizes overall, right? Let's sit down together and take some notes. You know, I've got a lot of small issues, and maybe it's going to lead to something bigger, maybe not. The fourth step there, think big picture. This is kind of a good segue or contrast from the previous point of view. You can also think more broadly to try to find some feedback, to try to give feedback. So this is referring to looking above and beyond the design specifics. And we're going to try to address and try to give feedback to more the overall intent of a piece and maybe the underlying meaning. So think big picture. If we imagine sort of a continuum, I couldn't find a good way to represent this visually, so I'll just describe it. If we have a continuum, and in the middle is sort of designery feedback, you know, the contrast, hierarchy, repetition, the very specific things that if you have some training or some knowledge, you can do. Well, what we just talked about was going below that, you know, breaking something apart into very tiny little chunks that you can just find issue with. Thinking big picture is going above that. So we're not going to be, you know, critiquing those middle layer things like color and things like that. But instead, we're going to be looking at, or at least trying to frame our thoughts in the bigger picture goals. What's the overall goal of what we're trying to do here? How does it fit into the market, or how does it fit into our business? Things like that. So a good example, if you have the feedback, hey, you know, you need to remove all the purple from that page. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems very direct, and it certainly is actionable. But there's not a lot of reasoning why there. But if you're starting to think bigger picture, you might realize, or you can approach it, that rather than we just need to get rid of the purple, maybe you can say, look, we've determined that our target market for these widgets is teenage boys exclusively. And this design feels a little feminine. So maybe, there's a mismatch there. Sometimes it helps, to look at how competitors present themselves to think big picture. And evaluate if the way that competitor is doing something, if that maps to your own, or maybe if it doesn't map to your own. These images are from a designer named Dan Mall. And he does a great exercise where when a company comes to him and they want to build a site or application, he'll work with them. He'll usually ask them for some adjectives, describe your business, describe how you fit in the market and things like that. And this is a lot of times, someone will say something like, we want to be playful. We want to come off as playful. So he'll say, okay, and he'll go back and do a little bit of work, and he might come back with something like this. You said you wanted to be playful. Well, this Go-Go Squeeze site, which I think is like a Go-Gurt competitor or something, is very playful. And then he'll take the company he's working with, just for our example, CNN here, and drop their logo on that site. Say, is this the feel we're going for? Do you really want to be playful? And the way he describes it, what often happens is that the company will say, no, you're right. That's not really the feel we're going for at all. And they work through a little bit. They have a bit more discussion. It comes out they just wanted to be colorful. But they're not designers. They didn't have the vocabulary to illustrate that. So they just sort of, the way they portrayed that was just kind of the wrong word. And he's using an exercise like this to sort of get past that or realize what the actual goal is. Now, I don't suggest you physically doing this exercise. That's obviously more of a designer exercise. But I'm talking about doing this sort of thing in your head. So if somebody shows you something, asks, what do you think of this? And you're trying to think high level about it, swap your competitor's logo in on there. Or vice versa. Take what they're doing there and go out and put it on those things. And see if it feels like it matches. Or if you're the type of company that wants to do the opposite of your competitors, then you don't want it to match, right? Same thing, if you're trying to be innovative, put it on some sites that are very traditional, or very trustworthy, or very conservative feeling, and see if there's a mismatch there. So you're trying to do this to look at motivations and kind of higher level concepts. So to think bigger picture, you might say something like, X feels very Y, and so does this being the thing that they're showing you to critique. Do we see our product as similar to X? Is that a good fit? Let's think about this as part of a broader plan. So beyond those 4 points, just a couple more notes here. Be honest when giving feedback. I think that it's extremely important. I almost don't know how to convey it. There's basically no point in giving feedback if you're not being honest, right? And people get worried about hurting feelings, or they get worried about, well, they're designers, they're doing art or something like that. Design is artistic. It can be creative, but it's not art. We're communicators. We're problem solvers. And we should be working together as a team to try to make something better. So you can't be worried, again, if you're approaching it in the right way, you can't be worried about offending someone or hiding your feelings in some kind of way, because dishonest feedback, it's certainly not going to help them improve or the product improve, and it might even set you back. It might even push things farther. So if you're being honest, or certainly when you're being honest, but along with that, keep in mind that the goal here is to find opportunity rather than just finding fault. So we're not commenting on someone's skill or them as a person. Again, this is not design school. We're not trying to tear somebody down or make ourselves look good in comparison because we're trying to be the best in the class or something like that. It really shouldn't be about office politics. It should be about the product or service, right? You're trying to make it better. So giving design feedback is a challenge, right? That is 100% true. I know in this short presentation, I haven't given you a magic bullet because there isn't one. It takes a lot of practice and effort to be good at it, and it's something you continually refine. But if you take your time, you're honest, and you use some simple exercises, I think you can help designers of all kinds create a better product, and grow themselves along the way. And that sounds like I'm finishing up. Obviously, it's a bit early. Got a bit of a pop quiz for everybody. I didn't think this presentation content would work extremely well as just a full hour-long presentation that you then go off and forget. So what I wanted to try to do is I've got some samples here that I want to work with the group to get some feedback on. Now, these are student work. They're just hypothetical redesigns that students have done. I chose them for a number of reasons. Obviously, they're not real, so no one's going to get mad or offended that we're tearing down their product or something like that. And they're famous brands, that we're all going to be familiar with, that we all know of. So what I wanted to do is just, if you'll bear with me for a moment, pretend that we're coworkers here, and I come up to you and I ask you guys, hey, what do you think of this? So this first one here, I think we're getting cut off a little bit, but that's okay. There's 3 slides to this one, so I'll go through them quickly and then we'll come back to the start. But this is a hypothetical redesign of the New York Times webpage. We'll just go through them. So, excuse me, this was the homepage, I believe. And this is an individual article itself. And I think this is some sort of special section. Or I'm sorry, no, this is New York specific. That's right, I always forget that. This is looking at the New York headlines. So I'll just go back to the homepage here for a second and open it up to you guys. Who has some feedback that they can offer? Okay, yeah, I should have said something. If you can raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then I'll repeat it. Yes. Okay. It's really dense, right. So I would maybe parlay that into, why is density a problem, right? It might be the target audience, or it might be a matter of what the goals are. I would say, so looking at design like this, if the goal is breadth of content, exposure to a wide range of content, it's very good. But it doesn't seem like it's going to lend itself to me reading any of these in any great detail, because I'm just flooded on the page, right? So, yeah.
Very text heavy. There's not a whole lot of images to capture the eye to draw me to any one particular story or another.
Absolutely. So the comment there was very text heavy. There's not a lot that draws his eye to any one particular area over another. Yeah.
The font differences are going to give problems to people with vision issues.
Okay, there's a comment about the font differences, some font sizes and colors and things that could be problematic for people with vision issues. That would certainly go back to goals too. Who's the target market for this? What sort of accessibility requirements do we have? Yeah.
I'm finding it hard to figure out what's important on the page.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot competing for your attention. So certainly, if I was the designer, I would. Or if I was commenting to the designer, I would question why they set up so many things visible at once. What led them to that decision? Because certainly it seems like that to me too. It seems like it's really difficult to figure out what I'm supposed to be looking at. Maybe I'm missing something, right? So I would pose that as a question to them to sort of ask their justification. Yeah?
Why did they make the icon choices they did at the top?
Yeah, so we're asking why they made these icon choices up here. Yep, I totally agree.
That the way that things are organized at the top is based upon when chronologically they happened?
Sure. So question there is the layout of the page, the structure of the page. It's following a chronological order, but it's certainly a kind of a non-traditional layout. So is that really the kind of thing that we're shooting for? Yeah, black shirt, yeah.
The different kind of categories of news are kind of conveyed only using kind of color contextually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So comment there was that different categories of news they're differentiated exclusively by color, which obviously poses problems for colorblind people and crappy devices or out in the sun or, who knows. Yeah.
Where is it 80 degrees and sunny?
Right. Yeah, 80 degrees and sunny. That's something that stood out to me too. Same thing with the time up there. I'm trying to figure out what device somebody uses that doesn't have a clock on it. Is it not? I would ask their reasoning behind that, because certainly to me it seems unnecessary to give that prominent of a spot to the time. Yeah, the top there.
What's the flow of the page? How do you want the user to be looking at it? Up, down, left to right? It seems there's too many directions.
Sure. So the comment there is on the flow of the page. What's the intent of how someone's supposed to flow through this? Obviously, we traditionally do a more vertical scrolling. That's kind of the common design pattern, and this is using horizontal space in a much stronger way. Yeah. Okay, yeah, the comment there is, again, that we don't know what those icons are up there. Yeah, I would question, obviously the page is as text-heavy as it is. I would question why they thought it necessary to remove the text labels from those icons. Yeah, we'll take a couple more, then we'll go on to another example here quickly.
I see in the bottom right, there's a view full calendar.
Sure. So yeah, we've got a view full calendar. We don't really see an obvious indication of another calendar. Is that intentional, or was that just kind of a mistake? What's going on there? Yeah.
The flow between the different pages.
Oh, excuse me. Whoops, I'm going too far. So this is an individual article. Yeah.
Has this completely different flow of reading compared to the previous, so you're disjointed.
Right. So the comment there is a disjointed feel. The viewing the home page and then viewing an article page is a totally different experience. And is that the kind of feel we're looking for, or is that, a question if that's going to be an issue or not? Yeah.
Yeah, this design is too similar to Yahoo.
Okay. So this design is too similar to Yahoo.
I mean the other page.
Oh, the home page. Sorry. This design.
Yeah.
Okay. The comment there is this design is too similar to Yahoo. So I guess I would try to convey that as sort of that higher level thought, right? Does the New York Times view itself in the same way Yahoo does? If we have a very similar layout, it's likely we could be associated with that to a user. And I'm guessing, Yahoo wants to feel very fresh and vibrant. New York Times, a much more traditional institution. Is that, going to be a conflict or not? So let me go to another one. We'll get some more comments here. This is a redesign. Oh, yeah, I apologize. We're getting cut off a little bit at the top there in the bottom. This is a redesign of Wikipedia. And again, I think this is the home page. It's titled main page, but we also have featured content. So I'm not really sure, but I think this is the home page of Wikipedia. And then we'll just go one more, then we'll go back. And then this is the individual page. We've clicked through on the main page to Nelson Mandela's article. And this is the article about Mr. Mandela. So I come to you and I say, we apparently work at Wikipedia, or Wikimedia Commons, whatever their name is. What do you guys think of this? So what are some thoughts on this one? Yeah.
What is the reason that that search functionality was not one of the primary things to include in the design?
Absolutely. So the comment there is, what is the reasoning behind search not being a prominent functionality? Certainly you go to Wikipedia's homepage now, it's almost exclusively search with some filtering by languages. So how did we arrive at that decision of going totally away from that? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you.
From everything else on this page, for some reason the icons on the far right almost look like they're not part of this site. They just don't match.
Okay. The comment there is that these icons over here on the right don't seem to match, the rest of the page. So I kind of ask, I would inquire as to how icons are being used elsewhere, if that makes sense, or if those are just the old ones and we didn't update them yet because there wasn't time or something. But certainly, calling that into question would make sense. Yeah.
So Wikipedia is like a repository of information, and this looks more like CNN. I mean, they have current events and
Absolutely.
content. Like, that's not Wikipedia. This is like a totally different product.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this one, too, is definitely a case where we can critique the design and aesthetics, but it's also a lot of kind of maybe information architecture questions, or, is the direction of the site going a different way? Yeah.
And I don't really understand the calendar type thing, cutting off the other half in the middle of the page.
Yeah. So this middle bar here, comment there is that this is not an understood, sort of piece of content or piece of functionality. I would agree. I would maybe, obviously you can get at the IA or something of why do we have a calendar, but in terms of visuals, certainly this doesn't really look like a calendar. It doesn't look like calendar widgets I've seen elsewhere. I'm not seeing a full month. It's the actual month label is buried to the right. So I would question, how was that decision arrived at, or is there some way we can bring in a more easily understood, representation of a calendar? Yeah.
So I missed the very beginning of all this,
Sure.
but I see that up and upper
Yeah, so general comment there is that it seems like we have a currently logged in user, and the assumption that this gentleman was making is that the logged in user's homepage would probably have some relevant information to him, right? Especially if he's a contributor on articles or a moderator or however that works. And right now, we don't seem to have any sort of customized information or personalized information. So I think that's a very valid point too. Yeah.
Yeah, two things. The picture on the left dominates the whole page, and wondering what the decision is before that. The other thing is, it looks very, the content and the structure look very random.
Yeah, so comment there, I guess two comments. One is that to some people this picture feels overpowering. And certainly that, if that was intentional, if the whole goal is to funnel you towards that, then maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not a problem. But if that's not the goal, which I'm kind of guessing it's not by how much other stuff there is in the page, that maybe that picture is too much, or maybe we look at a different treatment for that. And then the other comment was that the rest of the layout feels kind of random, which I think is a perfect place where I would ask somebody to walk you through, how they got there. Why is it laid out like this? It doesn't. I'm struggling with this layout. Can you walk me through it? So, okay. Take a quick look. This is an individual article page. Then we've gone through to Nelson Mandela, and we're viewing his page. Obviously, we're viewing the giant header of his page mostly. So, yeah.
So, is this the screenshot of the page, and you have to scroll down to get any more content?
Yeah, that's correct. I believe that, like I said, we're cut off a little bit. That's the very top of the page there.
Right.
Excuse me.
But that's not the bottom of it.
Right, yeah.
So,
I believe this is just beginning the part of what would be presumably a very long text article. Yeah, so obviously we are giving a ton of space to an image.
no content.
Very, very little to no content. I would question, we're bringing in this English here. I felt like you've probably navigated here in some way. I don't know if that's necessary to call out that big. We're also saying from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. Don't know if, again, that's that important. So certainly a lot of questions here on hierarchy and the things that we're giving a lot of space to. Do we have goals for that? Is that intentional? Does that match? When someone's going to access Wikipedia, they're looking for information, right? They're looking for presumably text. I mean, I know there's pictures, but presumably looking for text. And are we shifting away from that intentionally? Or are we just trying to make it look good and we've kind of gone too far? All right, well, I've got another example, but we don't have to go through it. I know we're kind of starting to get close on time here. So if anybody else has any kind of general questions, I'd be happy to have a few moments for discussion. Yeah?
Do you have any advice on how to give positive reinforcement during design reviews or critique?
Yeah, so the question there is, do I have any advice on how to give positive reinforcement? So I guess I think there's two parts to that. All the techniques we talked about, especially things like breaking things into small chunks and finding pain points, you can easily just do the inverse to that too. As you're breaking things into small chunks, if something seems to be working well, feel free to call that out. And if you're thinking higher level and something works well, feel free to call that out too. It's also kind of dependent on context and people. I'm an experienced designer. I have a thick skin. When I've been with a team I'm comfortable with, I don't really need that positive reinforcement. Doesn't mean I don't like it from time to time or like to feel that I'm doing a good job. But if everybody's being honest and if everybody is, truly kind of trying to work toward that common goal, I think eventually you can move away from feeling like you need to sandwich, compliments in around feedback and stuff and really make everybody comfortable with the fact that the feedback is to try to make the product better. It's not insulting the person or not telling them they're not good at what they do or anything like that. Yeah.
More of a general piece of advice, but at our company we do design critiques, and the developers all the time, one of the most useful things that they do is tell us, well, what happens if this other scenario happens, or this one? What happens when you don't have this great, big, beautiful photo? What happens to this page?
Absolutely. Yeah, so comment there was that his company, when they do design critiques, the developers are involved, and they sort of challenge the designers or challenge the designs with what happens in, null states or edge case scenarios or cold states and things like that. If you don't have a photo or there's nothing in there yet or the photo doesn't load, what happens with this? And I think that's an important point too. I touched on a little bit. Feel free to fall back on your own expertise to kind of frame your feedback. You may not be an expert designer, but you're probably an expert developer. And the way you're looking at a problem is probably different than they are. So I'd feel free to bring up those technical limitations or those technical questions to be able to kind of guide the visuals. Absolutely, yeah.
So as a designer, obviously, like all of the things that you said, but how do you kind of draw out feedback from somebody?
How do you draw out feedback from somebody was the question.
The rest of the team.
Right. Well, in a perfect world, you ask them, and they just tell you. But obviously, I guess I use, honestly, kind of these same steps. I will, but almost in reverse. Instead of asking why, I'll just tell them why I did what I did. I'll say, look, the reason I was building this is to add two-factor authentication to the app so that Ahmed can feel more comfortable logging in on his phone. And the thought there is that if they disagree or that wasn't what they're thinking, they'll speak up. And then I'll say, okay, so I laid it out this way. Assume he's on his phone, so I made everything a single column. Walk through my design decisions and sort of offer up my justification. And the hope there is that they would sort of speak out if anything was different than what they thought, or if they don't. If it's tough. If you truly don't get any feedback, like I said, I don't have a magic bullet. I think the thing you can do, or that I would try to do, is be honest with the developers and let them know, maybe if you're struggling with something and how valuable it is from them, so they know that it's not that you're paying lip service because you feel like you should ask people, but that you genuinely want their feedback because it helps you make something better. And I guess we have to kind of fall back on the hope that you're all working on the same company. Hopefully, if they realize you're being genuine and you're being honest, that they'll at least try to offer up something. So, yeah.
Earlier you said that it was a bad thing to give feedback of, I think this header should be, X bigger.
Yeah.
What if that is the feedback you have? Like if you're looking at a header on a page and it's too small for what a header should be, or it doesn't match the other pages, that your feedback is, I think the header should be a lot bigger.
Sure. Yeah, that sort of prescriptive feedback is kind of the term. So the question there is, is it always bad? If the header needs to be 20 pixels bigger, is it bad to tell the person the header needs to be 20 pixels bigger? I don't think it's bad, or I don't think it's wrong, but I would, if you can offer up the reasoning why, that helps it to seem a lot less passive-aggressive, or a lot less like, do what I tell you to do, and hey, this needs to be bigger because we have a minimum height on every page, or something like that. So I don't think it's bad as long as you can kind of frame it or offer up your own justification, and then maybe allow them space to offer a counterpoint if they have one. I think if you can do those things, it's perfectly fine to give that direct feedback. And like I said, if you have some experience and you have direct feedback, by all means, give it. The things I talked about today are things to try to fall on when you don't have any feedback and you're trying to figure out what to say or how to respond. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, guys. Last thing here, I work for a company called Coffee and Code, software consultants out of Akron, Ohio. Feel free to get in touch. We're always speaking and going to meetups and stuff like that, so we're always looking to chat with new people. And thanks for coming out.